Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle, and the purpose of these videos is to share wisdom and encouragement from my college years that is rooted in my Christian faith. So each week I've been posting a new video, just sharing something new about what God has done in my life, or a lesson that I've learned. And this week I'm really excited to share a story about how God moved in an amazing way during a spring break trip that I went on last year. So, in my freshman year of college, I participated in a fall break service trip to Washington, D.C. So, Penn State has a club called Penn State Alternative Breaks, and they go on service trips during fall break and spring break. And it's just an opportunity for students to engage in issues that are important to them and to learn more about service. And so the trip that I went on was focused on poverty and homelessness in the Washington, D.C. area, which are two issues that I'm very passionate about. And so I was excited to have this chance to go and learn more and serve and really just engage in these issues. Um, and so, yeah, so this was during my freshman year. And while I did learn a lot from this trip, it was definitely a challenging experience for me. Um, in the past, I had really only done service trips like with my church or with youth group. And so it had always been sort of a faith based thing. And this was the first time that I was participating in a group that that wasn't connected to a church or didn't sort of have that perspective. And so, which was not a bad thing, but I think was just one of the first times that I was the only Christian in this group. And I think the thing that was the most challenging for me was that I've always sort of tied my faith to service and seen the two as being very interconnected. And so I was sort of realizing that not everybody was coming from the same perspective, and was not there for all of the same reasons. And so, yeah, I guess just kind of felt kind of lonely during the trip. But anyway, so fast forward 2 years, and I was a junior in college, and it was the fall semester, and I ran into one of the girls who had been on the fall break service trip with me in freshman year. She was a senior at the time, and so we were just kind of catching up, and she was like, "Hey, you should apply to be a site leader for the alternative spring break trip." So she was still involved in alternative breaks, and there was the spring break trip coming up, and so she encouraged me to apply to be a leader. And I was kind of like, okay, yeah, like I'll think about it. And she was like, well, the application is due tomorrow, so if you want to apply, you should do it like right away. And so I was like, okay, yeah, like I'll think about it. And so I went home, and I was not really sure if I wanted to apply, but I knew that I wanted to get involved in more clubs, and so I was just sort of like, okay, maybe I'll just look into it. And so I did end up applying to be a site leader, and went through the interview process, and pretty shortly after found out that I was selected to be a site leader. So all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm gonna be planning and leading this trip. And I don't know where I'm gonna be going or what I'm gonna be doing, but like I guess I'm doing this. And so a few weeks later, we had our leadership retreat, which is where we would find out which trip we were leading and who we were going to be leading with. And so during the application process, we were able to put down a preference of which trip we wanted to lead. There were 9 trips total, and they were all focused on different issues like poverty or the environment. So the trip that I was really hoping to be chosen to lead was the trip that was going to Wilmington, North Carolina. And the trip was focused on homelessness and food insecurity, which were two issues that I knew I was passionate about. I also have just always loved the state of North Carolina and have always wanted to live there, so thought it would be kind of cool to spend my spring break in North Carolina. And also the organization that Penn State was partnered with was a Christian-based organization that really focused on direct service and reaching out to the homeless community. And so as I was doing research on the organization, just really kind of liked what they were about. And yeah, so I was really hoping to be selected for the North Carolina trip, but was also just open to whatever I was selected for. So during the leadership retreat, I actually remember that I had to come late because I had another commitment. And as soon as I walked in, I met the other site leaders, and they were just like, yeah, so you're going to North Carolina. And I was like, oh, great, like that was my first choice. And so I also was introduced to my co-leader, the girl who would be leading the trip with me, whose name was Nikki. And so Nikki and I got along really well right away. And it turns out that Nikki was also involved with Christian ministry on campus, which was a cool connection, just to be able to relate on that, and just knowing that we were kind of coming from a similar perspective. So yeah, it just seemed like everything was kind of coming together, and I really felt like, okay, this is really what God is calling me to do. Just felt a really strong sense of peace about the trip, and was really excited for it. So we spent the first half of the spring semester planning for the trip, which included selecting our participants and getting to know them, sort of building the group dynamic, also educating our participants on the issues that we were going to be working with, and also communicating with our community partners in Wilmington. So it was a lot of work to plan for the trip, and during this time was really just praying that God would teach me something through the trip. I knew that we were working with a Christian organization, but obviously not all of our participants were coming from a Christian background. And so, yeah, was just really praying that that God would move in people's hearts and really just allow me to connect my faith to the experience. So when spring break came, we loaded into vans and set out to Wilmington, North Carolina. The organization that we were working with was called Vigilant Hope, which was a small missions organization that focused on urban poverty, and was a really cool organization because while they focused a lot on direct service, they also did a lot of training and educating people on sort of the right way to serve, and how to serve people with dignity, and just really kind of wanting to educate people on the right way to go about service, which I appreciated. The other thing about Vigilant Hope was that they were very openly Christian. So the first night that we got there, we met them and were talking, and before we went to bed, they led us all in a prayer, and the next morning was the Sunday morning, so they invited us to go to the church that was connected to the organization, and so yeah, it was within the first 24 hours of the trip, we had already had 3 worship experiences, and had really just been exposed to Christianity and faith in a lot of different ways, which for me was very uplifting and encouraging, but obviously was not sure how the rest of the trip participants would respond to that. But I did notice that people were already sort of having conversations about faith and saying things like, oh, like my church at home is nothing like this, and like I really liked that service. And yeah, so it was really just making people think, and I think kind of changing people's perspectives about Christianity, which was encouraging to me because I think a lot of people have not the best perceptions of what Christianity is all about. So, another thing that I should mention is that during the week we were working with another college group from a local church, and so every night our group from Penn State would have a debrief where we would discuss what we did that day, what we learned, and sort of process our experience. And at the same time, the church in Wilmington was having their own small group reflection where they would do a Bible study, and it was a lot more faith-based. And so about halfway through the week, they started inviting our participants to join them in their reflections. And so a couple of our participants decided to go, and I don't know what happened during that small group reflection, but I guess they ended up sharing the gospel with one of our participants, and like that night, our participant gave his life to Christ. And so I later found out about this and was just like, wow, like that's incredible. Like God is really moving, and who knows what the rest of the week is going to look like. And so throughout the week, some of our participants continued to go to these small groups with the other church group. And there was another boy on our trip who was sort of struggling with his faith. And they really sort of took the time to talk with him and to go through the Bible with him and really just encourage him in his faith. And so I could tell that he was learning and growing, and that God was really working in his heart too. And another night we had sort of a group reflection that was led by the guys from Vigilant Hope, which was the organization we were working with. So this was a combined reflection with both our group from Penn State and the group from this local church. And so during this reflection, one of the guys from Vigilant Hope shared his testimony, and then we ended the night with a worship night. And so during this time of worship, one of our students from Penn State pulled out her guitar and started playing the worship song called You Are Good. And so all of a sudden, it was like all these people were together, some who knew the Lord, some who didn't, but we were all together in this room just worshiping God, and I was just like, this is incredible. And so what really stuck out to me from all of these things that were happening is that I really wasn't a part of any of them. Like, it was the organization that sort of got people talking about faith, and then it was this church group that was really sort of coming alongside our participants and teaching them about the Bible, and kind of helping guide them along in their faith. And I was kind of like, I'm used to being the only Christian in these groups and striving to live out my faith and share my faith. And it was sort of like, for the first time, all of these things were just happening around me, and I just got to sit back and take it all in. And so I was thinking about that when we did our service the next day, and many of our days were spent working on an urban farm that was owned by a wonderful older couple. And so we were doing things like weeding and digging and raking, but also got to plant seeds. And I don't have a lot of experience with gardening besides our little garden at home. And so a lot of us didn't really know what we were doing. And one of the days I was helping to put down seeds, and I was working with one of the guys from Vigilant Hope, and I was kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And he said, it's kind of cool because all we have to do is just put down these seeds, and God kind of does the rest of the work in terms of making it grow. And I was like, isn't that a Bible verse? And he was like, yeah, actually it is. And so I looked up this verse later. It's 1 Corinthians 3:7. And the verse says, "So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow." Immediately, I was just humbled because I was reminded that I did play a small part in all of these things that were happening. And that was that I prayed before our trip. I prayed for our participants. I prayed that God would be moving in people's hearts. And I felt like in that moment, God was reminding me that maybe my only job on this trip was to pray and to just plant that seed. And through these other people, those seeds would be watered. And so I was just amazed by that, just how God so clearly spoke to me through that verse, and also just through the work that we were doing of literally planting seeds and just reminding me that it's Him who does the work of making things grow, but that He does allow us to play a role in planting seeds, and in watering those seeds and coming alongside people. But ultimately, it's God who works in people's hearts. So it ended up just being an incredible rest of the week. The church group that was there ended up giving 2 of our participants a Bible and got their contact information if they ever had any questions, or wanted to watch their church sermons, and was really just wanted to help them to continue to grow in their faith. And when we got back to Penn State from the trip, it was a Saturday, and the next day, every single one of our participants on the trip came to my church with me, and we literally took up the entire row. And in that moment, I feel like I was reminded of my freshman year when I was on the fall break trip and was just feeling really lonely. And now I was surrounded by all these people, and we were at church, and was just like, wow, like God is so faithful. And so following that, one of the guys who I had mentioned had been struggling in his faith a little bit, started coming to my campus ministry, and so was coming consistently and was continuing to grow. And I say that just to say that this wasn't just a spiritual experience, but that God really was doing a work in people's hearts. And I've continued to stay in touch with a lot of the students that were on that trip and have just continued to see God move in different ways. So I really just want to share that message for people who kind of feel like, I want to share my faith or I want to see God move, but I don't really know what my place is. And sometimes our place is as simple as just praying, and God uses so many people and circumstances to draw people closer to Himself, and ultimately He is the one that makes things grow. So thank you guys for watching. I hope that you could be uplifted by this story just as I have been. And yeah, just want to encourage you to continue to be faithful in the little things and the things that God is calling you to do, because the Bible says that you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. And ultimately, it is God who does the work. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next week.